Hello and welcome to Craftiosity, the subscription box of modern craft kits. Slow stitching meets the celestial in this month's embroidered tea towel project. This mini stitch sampler will show you how to create 5 different stitches and can be created in just a few hours. So make yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. Inside your kit you'll find your 4 colours of embroidery thread, your embroidery hoop and embroidery needle, your cotton tea towel and your template for the project. You'll also find your step-by-step photo instructions. Place the template under the bottom right-hand corner of the tea towel with it facing right side up. Trace around the clouds using a series of dots, not a solid line. Unscrew your hoop to separate the 2 parts. Place the solid hoop underneath the top 2 clouds. Push the hoop with the screw over the top and tighten. The fabric should be taut like on a drum. Cut an arm's length of the mid-blue thread and separate out 2 strands by pulling out 1 strand at a time. Knot these 2 strands together at one end and thread the other ends through the needle. Begin sewing the top right cloud first using seed stitch. To create the seed stitch pattern, bring the thread from the back to the front of the work, then down to the back again around 5 mm away. Repeat this, spacing out each seed stitch by 5 mm to 1 cm and placing them in different directions. Work to the edge of the cloud outline, but don't sew a solid outline around it. When you've finished, it should look a little like this. Fasten off the threads at the back of the work by sewing through the back of a stitch a few times. Move the hoop to the second cloud, making sure the fabric is drum tight again. Cut an arm's length of pale blue thread. Thread the needle with 2 strands, knotting the other end. Start to stitch the cloud using little X's. Work in one direction to start and then work back along the line to complete the X. Don't join the X's, but leave a small gap between each one. Work to the edge of the cloud, but don't sew a solid outline around it. When working the X stitches, work from the outside into the middle in a spiral. Space each X evenly, horizontally and vertically. Fasten off the threads on the back of the work, then move the hoop to cover the bottom cloud. Cut an arm's length of the dusky pink thread. Thread the needle with 2 strands, knotting the other end. Use French knots, or if you find them simpler, what we call easy French knots. For French knots, sew from the back to the front. Hold the needle 1 cm away from the fabric and wrap the thread around the needle 3 to 4 times. As you wrap, hold the needle taut away from the fabric and keep the wrapped thread tight too. Still holding the thread very tightly and taut, move the needle to the same place you came up in. Slowly sew back down, pulling the needle from the underside with your hand on the reverse of the work. Keep the thread pulled tight in your other hand as you do so, maintaining the tension until the length of thread is fully pulled to the back. Your French knot is formed. For the easy French knot, sew from the back to the front. Come back down 2 mm away from where you come up, creating a small stitch. Sew up to the front of the work in the same place you did as before. Then sew around the small stitch just made from right to left, keeping the needle on the front of the work. Repeat this 3 to 4 times, always sewing in the same direction until you build up a little wrap over the top of the small stitch. To complete the easy French knot, sew back down through to the back of the fabric on the other side of the stitch. Your easy French knot is formed. Fill in the 3rd cloud with easy French or French knots, spacing them all in a slightly random way 2 to 5 mm apart until the cloud is full. Fasten off the threads. Now we'll make the moon and stars. Remove the hoop and place it to the side for now. Place the template underneath the tea towel and trace the rest of the design, the moon, the stars and the foliage. Use a solid line when tracing, but press lightly. Then cut an arm's length of the dark grey thread. Thread the needle with all 6 strands, knotting the other end. Replace the hoop over the top right of the design and use backstitch to stitch the foliage. To create the back stitch, use small 2mm stitches. Make one stitch coming up and then back down 2mm away. For your second stitch, come up from the back of the work 2mm away, leaving a 2mm gap. Next, rather than sewing away and leaving the gap empty, sew back towards the first stitch and come back down the same hole. For the third stitch, come up again 2mm away and then bring the needle back down to meet the previous stitch. Continue back stitching in this way, gently curving around the template lines with small 2mm stitches. Stitch both the sprigs of foliage using back stitch. If you need to move the hoop, ensure the fabric is as drum tight as possible each time. Fasten off the threads on the back of the work as you go. Stitch the moon outline using back stitch and 6 strands of the dark grey thread as for the foliage. To create the little stars, use 6 strands of dark grey knotted at one end. Sew from the back to the front of the work and create a vertical stitch around 5mm long. To create a little 4-legged star, make one stitch horizontally across the first, also 5mm long, to create a plus shape. Fasten off on the back of the work. Try to keep the tail ends of the threads on the reverse of the work short to prevent them showing through the tea towel or getting tangled. To create a 6-legged star, make your second and third stitches in an X formation intersecting with the middle of the first vertical stitch. Fasten off your thread on the back of the work. To complete the celestial design, use satin stitch to fill in the moon and leaves. Cut an arm's length of dark grey thread. Thread the needle with all 6 strands, knotting the other end. Sew from the back to the front of the work, coming up immediately outside of the back stitch outline on the left hand side of the moon. Sew from the front to the back of the work, coming down immediately outside of the back stitch outline on the right hand side of the moon. Continue in this pattern, working around the back stitched outline of your moon as you go. Make sure your fabric is very taut in the hoop and that you don't pull excessively when you make your stitches, as this will cause the fabric to pucker and distort the stitches. To add interest to the satin stitch, you may want to encourage the direction of your stitches to move around as the moon curves. To do this, place the points at which you come up on the inside of the moon slightly closer together than the points where you come down on the outside edge of the moon. When the moon is fully satin stitched, it should look a little like this. Fasten off your threads on the back of the work. Repeat the same satin stitch for the foliage leaves. Start at the bottom middle of each leaf and make one large stitch straight through the middle up to the top. Then place 2 to 3 stitches either side of this, making them smaller each time to fit the shape of each leaf. When moving between the leaves, sew up the stem on the back of the work, not across the unworked fabric. Fasten off your threads on the back of the work. When you're finished, iron your tea towel on the back, and well done, your embroidered moon tea towel is complete. Thanks so much for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and we look forward to welcoming you to the next craft kit next month.